I just look at the rosters in the ACC. While I think one team in particular has a roster that is slightly above that of the others, I don't think that one roster can adequately contend 3 consecutive weeks en route to a national championship. Hello and welcome. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and we appreciate you coming to us from wherever it is you're coming to us from, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the ESPN College YouTube channel. We appreciate you guys so much for all that you've done to help grow the show the last couple of years. Our numbers are up tremendously the last few years, especially from a podcast standpoint. We appreciate the growth that you guys have helped us experience. We have a great show for you today. We did Big Ten the other day. We're doing tiers, okay? That's how I think we need to assess the college football world moving forward. We need to look at it in tiers. These are championship contenders. These are teams that can make the playoff. These are teams that floor should be 8 or 9 wins. These are teams whose ceiling should be 8 or 9 wins. These are teams who should make a bowl game. And these are teams who, if they do make a bowl game, they should feel really excited about what their team accomplished this year. So we're going to look at it in the 6 tiers. And we're going to break the ACC up accordingly. So let's dive in. The ACC and the 6 tiers of college football. Moving forward into the tiers of the ACC. We did this and had this practice already with the Big Ten. It was really successful. Had a lot of fun doing it. I think this is kind of the way we have to look at teams nowadays, because we're going to look at tier 3 teams that might make the college football playoff. Might get hot, might make the playoff, might ruin a team's candidacy in the playoff. So I think looking at college football through the tiers lens is appropriate. Now, granted, tier 1 of this new era, this new format. So I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but here's how I think it's going to work. All right. So you have championship contenders. That's tier 1. Tier 2, college football playoff contenders. Tier 3, spoilers, teams that can win 8 or 9. But, that's even in some cases probably pretty tough to do. But they're solid, rock solid teams you don't really want to play against. Then you have the teams that are pretty much guaranteed, I would think, to go to a bowl game, or at least hope to go to a bowl game. And then teams that a bowl game would be a tremendous accomplishment. So you have all these different tiers, all right? Tier 1, let's start in the ACC. Tier 1, I quantify as legitimate national championship contenders. And in Tier 1 in the ACC, there are 0. Now, doesn't mean that a team can't get hot. Doesn't mean that a team can't come from nowhere to potentially go and compete and beat the likes of Georgia, Ohio State, multiple teams like that en route to a championship. I just look at the rosters in the ACC. And while I think one team in particular has a roster that is slightly above that of the others, I don't think that one roster can adequately contend 3 consecutive weeks en route to a national championship. They might be able to get 1, maybe they can get 2, but can they win 3 in a row? I don't know if they can in this league as of this moment. So the ACC, I don't have anybody in tier 1. In tier 2, I have a handful. These are college football playoff contenders. They can obviously win their league. That's one way in. But even if they don't win their league, I wouldn't be surprised if any of these teams are in the mix for one of those top 12 seeds. Let's start with the Miami Hurricanes. I think they are the best roster in the ACC. And those that have pointed to Mario's shortcomings, the process is working. Okay? The process is working. They've done a really good job of jump-starting the roster with some guys that have been impactful in the portal. They've also supplemented that portal with great high school recruiting. So you have a nice blend of both. You also have really built the roster from the inside out. You look at the offensive line, they're one of the best in the country. The defensive line had a freshman All-American last year in Ruben Bain, and they might be in position to have some true freshmen stepping onto the field early this year, considering it's one of the highest rated recruiting classes that Miami's had in the last 10 years or 10 years and change. All right, now people will point to the win-loss record. It wasn't good. I understand that. And there were multiple games in which Miami let the opponent off the hook. But the win-loss record could be addressed by addressing 2 issues. 1, turnovers. Okay? Tyler Van Dyke, for all of his talent, and he had tons of it, he played incredible early in the year. At one point, he was one of the highest rated quarterbacks in the country. After the A&M game, it's like, this guy is back to his old self. Well, things fell off pretty quickly. In the first 17 games of his career, he was 34-8 touchdown interception ratio. The last half of last year, he was 5 touchdowns against 11 interceptions. That's not good enough. How many different games did a late turnover or a big mistake cost the Miami Hurricanes? The other thing that they struggled with, they struggled in the red zone. That was a huge issue all throughout the year in being able to get to the red zone, but ultimately they did not punch it in with enough regularity. In steps, I think, the biggest transfer winner in the entire portal process, and that's Cam Ward. Coming over from Washington State, he'll take over for Tyler Van Dyke. Turnover problems, red zone problems, hopefully they're a thing of the past. Cam Ward's career touchdown interception ratio, well, last year at least, 25-7, and he's a great runner. So what's one thing that you can use in the red zone that can really make things easier on your offense? Quarterback run. Tyler Van Dyke, that wasn't a part of his game. Quarterback run game, though, with Cam Ward, that's going to be huge in the red zone when the field condenses and you can now run the quarterback. You also have a great 1-2 punch at running back. You look at the addition of Damian Martinez, that's going to take some of the pressure off behind an offensive line that should even be better than a year ago. Defensively, they're going to be great. They're going to be super stout in the front seven. You look at some of the additions they made along the defensive line, a couple of big-time, highly touted prospects that are already there to complement some transfer portal additions. They replaced starters from last year with starters from the Power Five, one from NC State and CJ Clark, one from Michigan State and Simeon Barrow. You got a great pass rush specialist from Marshall. Like, they have guys up front that are legit, difference-making dudes. Well, they just brought in a bunch of 5-stars along the line of scrimmage, and they have Ruben Bain. Front seven is going to be awesome. That's going to be helpful, too, because secondary is a problem. A lot of questions, but a great pass rush can alleviate some of those concerns. So I look at this group collectively. I think they can make the playoff, and I think they could make a run, but they're going to stay healthy, and they're going to have to solidify the back end defensively. Let's go next to another team in Tier 2. That's the Florida State Seminoles. You look at the offense, bunch of guys gone. A bunch of guys gone from last year's team. And while this year's group might not be as star-studded, they might be steadier. There were things about Jordan Travis's play that I loved. I love Jordan Travis, still to this day, one of my favorite players that I've ever covered. From his first start a million years ago against Georgia Tech, or first start in the opener against Georgia Tech, I think it was like 2020, to where they're at now. Really been proud of where he grew, but there were moments where it was like chaos offensively. Well, they also lost their top running back. They also lost their top 2 wide receivers. They also lost their best playmaking tight end. They also lost a couple of great offensive linemen. They lost a bunch of guys that were really impactful last year. Here's the thing. I'm not worried about running back at all. Running back room brings back Lawrence Toafili, who I think is one of the best football players that they have. They bring in a good transfer from Alabama and Roydell Williams. They're going to be all right at running back. That doesn't concern me. Wide receiver is a concern. I look at what Keon Coleman was, the playmaking ability, the contested catches that he was able to make, the catch and runs. I mean, the guy took over the LSU game. There were a bunch of games where it felt like he just completely took over. Then you had Johnny Wilson, who at 6'7" had great length and was difficult to defend. So in the red zone, you had to be real mindful of where he was every time he stepped foot on the field. I look at who's expected to step into those roles, whether it's Ja'Kai Douglas, the only returner with 10-plus catches last year. Kentron Pointier's been around for a long time. Malik Benson's a transfer from Alabama. Never got to see the field really last year at Alabama. Was supposed to be a huge difference maker last year. Never really played a whole lot. And then you bring in Jaylen Brown from LSU, who has top-end speed that is unrivaled. So they have guys that just, they're question marks. And then you have DJ Uiagalelei, who in that run-centric offense last year at Oregon State, where it was heavy play action, back to the defense, stretch the field vertically on play action downfield. The guy can throw the ball a country mile. Now, will he be able to play fast enough, and will he be accurate enough on some of the underneath and intermediate stuff to make this offense go? Now, I think Mike Norvell is going to do a great job of protecting him. I still think he's one of the best play callers in the country, so he will protect DJ Uiagalelei, but a lot was put on the shoulders of Jordan Travis last year, and I would anticipate this offense, a lot's going to be put on the shoulders of DJU as well. Defensively, that defense last year was unbelievable. They lost 7 of their top 12 players, and it's a big reload project for Adam Fuller. Here's the positive. I feel great about their defensive front. It's hard to say that, too, when you think about it. Jared Verse being gone, Braden Fisk being gone, and yet you're still not super concerned about the defensive line. When you lose those 2 guys, that's saying something about what I think Josh Farmer can become, and with the additions that they made in the transfer portal, like Siona Lolohea from Oregon State, Marvin Jones, who's a big-time prospect from Georgia. They bring in another great edge defender from West Virginia. They also have a couple guys, too, that are just waiting in the wings, waiting for that opportunity to be thrust into the starting lineup. So I think their front is going to be great. Questions that I have are at the second level. I thought Tatum Bethune did a great job. I thought they were solid at linebacker the last couple of years. Now, DJ Lundy's played a lot, but he was really more the run-stopping linebacker. Now he's going to be in kind of an every down role. So I'll be watching linebacker closely. I like their corners, but I'll be watching the rest of the defensive back end and the shell and the structure. I'll be looking at those positions early in the season to make sure that Adam Fuller, has adequately replaced those pieces from a year ago. But I still think this defense will carry the day, but I need the emergence of playmakers offensively to feel better about Florida State solidifying itself as a tier 2 program in the ACC. And potentially, if those pieces do come to the forefront, maybe they can elevate into tier 1 status this year. Let's go next to the Clemson Tigers. I still have them in tier 2. Most people want to write them off as if they're dead. I, for one, am going to resist the urge of going down the Tyler from Spartanburg rabbit hole, because I believe in the young nucleus of talent that they had last year. If you look at last year's performances too, right? I mean, there were a million different, like Florida State needed a sack fumble return to the house and a missed field goal to beat Clemson last year. Okay. NC State and Miami also took advantage, won the game by a touchdown. And now you look, they're at the midway point of the season, just beyond midway point. They're 2-4 in the ACC heading into November. Well, final month, they found out who they were. They went young on defense, and they rallied with a 5-game win streak. They beat Notre Dame. They beat North Carolina. They win a nice, crazy bowl game against Kentucky. Like, there's a lot to like about how this team played down the stretch. And anytime I look at a team that's lost 3 games by 1 score or less, they weren't good in the red zone. They could have easily changed a couple things, and next thing you know, they're cooking with gas. After all, I mean, there was a time last year where Clemson had to call a walk-on that was working and selling insurance in Charleston to come back and become their kicker, okay? We're talking about a team that finished 121st out of 133 in the red zone. They scored on just 73% of their red zone trips. And yet they lost 3 games by 1 score or less. That includes, some games against quality competition, I might add. Miami was pretty good. NC State was pretty good. We know Florida State was good. They weren't that far away last year. And you look at it last year, too. Cade Klubnik turned the ball over an awful lot. 9 picks, 10 fumbles, lost 5 of those fumbles, compared to just 19 touchdown passes. But we're expected for Cade Klubnik to just come right in and be the next Trevor Lawrence. That is really hard to do. And I know it's been easy to look at the Clemson helmet and just assume, oh yeah, the next guy will be just like Deshaun. Well, Kelly Bryant and Trevor Lawrence, they couldn't adequately replace Deshaun Watson. Kelly Bryant couldn't. And as a result, he got replaced by the next generational guy in Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence thought he was going to be just replaced, no problem. In comes DJ Uiagalelei. Right where they left off. Didn't work out that way. Sometimes there's some growing pains when you're thrust into the starting lineup with expectations like Clemson has at the position. So I'm cautiously optimistic that Cade Klubnik, now with 14 starts under his belt, is going to be a much better player moving forward. I look at Cade Klubnik and I think about his development. I compare it comparably to Bo Nix. And I look at Bo Nix early in his career. And if you just kind of watch their style of play, by the way, it's kind of similar, like eerily similar. Bo Nix was sporadic and erratic and would just kind of run around and create. And he felt like the world was just moving too quickly for him. Well, he got a little bit older and transferred to Oregon. Just everything slowed down. Everything become a little bit less helter-skelter. I think that can happen with Cade Klubnik this year, potentially. Another year in the system, another year feeling comfortable with Garrett Riley, and hopefully he'll take a significant step forward. But I don't think you can play quarterback by yourself. You know what Deshaun Watson had. You know what Trevor Lawrence had. They had game-changing wide receivers. And with all due respect to Clemson the last few years, the receivers have not been consistent enough. Why? Because they've had to rely on freshmen. At one point last year, it was Tyler Brown's show. He was their best weapon at wide receiver. He was a true freshman. At one point 2 years ago, it was Antonio Williams. Guess what he was 2 years ago? A freshman. They've had other guys too, Adam Randall, Troy Stellato. Like, they're going to be all right at wide receiver because they had to kind of go young. And now those guys have been groomed and are potentially going to be pushed by another true freshman in Bryant Wesco, who looks like he could become a star. Brenning Stool's been effective at tight end as well. Phil Mapa is going to add physical element to the run game, and we know the defense is going to be great. So I am still really optimistic about Clemson. Can they win the national championship? That's a hard one for me to predict, but I do think they can be in the mix come playoff time as one of those teams that could secure an at-large spot. Let's go next to tier number 3. These are qualified as the dark horses. And these are teams that could make their way to the playoff. But in all likelihood, they're probably an 8-9 win team that nobody really wants to play. And there's a bunch, by the way. There's a bunch in the ACC this year. I love the depth of this league, and tier 3 is a great example of why this group could be real dangerous. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if these teams slide up to tier number 2 or slide down to tier number 4. Let's start with the NC State Wolfpack. Now, they opened up last year 4-3, not that dissimilar to Clemson, I might add. Had a couple of bad losses to Duke, bad loss to Notre Dame. So after the bye week, they kind of figured things out. They get going a little bit. You beat Clemson, you beat Wake Forest, you beat North Carolina. First time they've done that in 20 years. Dave Doran gets his team back to 8+ wins, which has been a pretty amazing streak considering it's never happened at NC State 4 years in a row. When anyone not named Phillip Rivers was the quarterback. They went out, they signed Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina, 3-time Sun Belt Player of the Year, has won a lot of games, has thrown for over 10,000 career yards. So he, considering some of the options in the portal, that's a great addition. And then when he's signed, all of a sudden the floodgates open. You go get Jordan Waters out of Duke, who over the last couple of years, 1,600 yards. You go get Justin Jolly from UConn, big-time tight end transfer. You go and add a couple of pieces at the wide receiver spot from Ohio State, from Wake Forest, to take some of the pressure off of KC Concepcion, who's the only player in the FBS last year with 250-plus rushing yards and 750-plus receiving yards. The guy is just to get on the ball, see what he does with it. He's electric, absolutely electric. If you haven't watched him, go check him out. He was the ACC Rookie of the Year last year. On defense, they do lose Peyton Wilson. Anytime you're having to replace 400 career tackles, all ACC honors every year. And Bednarik Butkus Award winner, unanimous All-American. Like, anytime you got to replace a guy like that, it's going to be tough sledding. Okay. The good news is there were a couple guys that were on the fence for NC State on the defensive side that were considering a jump to the NFL, considering putting their name maybe in the portal to kind of leverage up with NIL, and they all decided to come back, including a great defensive end in Davin Vann. I think a lockdown corner in Aiden White, a couple of safeties too. I mean, they're in a good spot. And you look at their schedule. Now, they really only face 2 of the top 8 programs in the ACC. And you look at their schedule, just 1 through 12, game 1 through game 12. They should be favored in 75% of their games. They also have a really nice non-conference opportunity against Tennessee. And while by far their most difficult conference game is at Clemson, they got Clemson a year ago. So I think NC State's poised to make a lot of noise again this year, because look at what Dave Doran's created. The guy is just rock solid. He's really steady, and I would expect much of the same from him, assuming they can keep Grayson McCall upright, keep him healthy, because they have had some woes at quarterback at times the last couple of years. Let's go next to Louisville, also in tier number 3. Brian Brom's the OC. Jeff Brom is incredible. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. He took Purdue to the conference championship game. It took him 5 years to get there, but he got him there. Well, it didn't take long at Louisville. It took just 1 year. The funny thing is, you look back at the style of offense that Jeff Brom played at Purdue, and it was like, we're going to throw it all over the yard. We can't run it, so we're just going to throw it. Pitch and catch, baby. Well, he gets to Louisville, and he says, yeah, I kind of like this Isaac Garendo guy. I like this Jawar Jordan guy. Like, we're just going to hand it off and run for 2,000. Well, it's pretty amazing that they'll adjust their offense based on what they have. And they really turned into a complementary team that allowed their defense to be incredible and their offense to really feature the playmakers, whether it's Jamari Thrash at wide receiver or the two-headed monster at running back that they had throughout. Then they already proved that they can do a great job in the portal. They went out and they had 31 more players, second most in the country. Massive class. And within that class was the addition of Tyler Shuck, 7th-year quarterback from Texas Tech. Now, got banged up a few times in his time at Texas Tech. Prior to that, he was at Oregon. So he's been well-traveled. This guy's got a lot of potential. He's got some playmaking ability, too. And Jack Plummer, the guy who he's replacing, a little bit more pocket presence, a little bit more of a kind of stay within the offensive scheme. Tyler Shuck's got some game. Like, he can create on his own. He's got a big arm. He's also going to have some really capable weapons on the perimeter as well. The addition of Colin Lacey from Louisville was massive. Over 1,300 yards last year, 7 touchdowns, highly coveted prospect in the portal. They were able to land him. They also got Ja'Cory Brooks from Alabama, who was really solid. You got a couple of big-time tight ends, one from San Diego State, one from Miami, one from Kentucky. Yes, Kentucky. Isaiah Cummings transferred from Kentucky to Louisville. That's how backwards the world is right now. But they added 3 guys that are going to make their offense a little bit more versatile. Then defensively, this is really where you feel best about them. Outside of knowing that Jeff Brom's going to score points, Jeff Brom's going to score, know that. But you think about how Louisville won last year, and it was really good on third down defense, and they were really good in the red zone. They were allowing just 68% of the time scores on red zone trips. That was number 1 in the country. They were number 10 in third down conversions. Plus, they bring back 9 starters. So they got a lot of pieces to like on the defensive side, including Ashton Gelati, who's a take over the game end of the line of scrimmage defender. So they can do a lot with those guys. They got game changers on the outside. They got game changers up front. Louisville's going to be really good. And their schedule sets up for a very challenging run, but a run that wouldn't really surprise me if they made a lot of noise during it. 5 of the toughest games that they have this year at Notre Dame. Tell me Notre Dame won't have that one circled considering how things went last year. Yet they will. So Notre Dame will have their eye on the prize. Georgia Tech is at home. Miami is at home. I think Miami has a chance to potentially make the playoff. Well, they have to go to Louisville. Never easy to do that. They travel to Clemson. Clemson will be a tough place to play, no doubt about it. So that will be a game that will be very, very interesting as well. And they have to go to Kentucky, where they have not fared well against the Wildcats these last couple years. All right. Going to be interesting to see how things go for Louisville this year. But I do think they have fortified some of the departures off last year's roster and have a program now, that will just continue to replace that talent. All right, Tier 4, these are the spoilers. And I kind of combine these with Tier 3. Tier 3 are the ones that I trust just a little bit more. Tier 4, they have a high ceiling, but their floor is also a little bit lower. So I qualify these as just a touch lower than what we would see in Tier 3. Those are teams that I think are pretty much the floor would be 8 wins. These teams that we'll discuss here, the ceiling is 8 wins. So, but kind of interchangeable, and the depth of this group is pretty considerable for the ACC. Let's go to the spoilers. SMU. They went 11-3 last year. The problem is they were 11-0 against non-Power 5 teams and 0-3 against the Power 5. Now they're playing a Power 5 schedule. Now they were competitive in all those games. They were really competitive against some of those teams for sure. But they ultimately couldn't hang on against Oklahoma, TCU, and Boston College in the bowl game. So looking at how they transitioned, Rhett Lashley was pretty aware that watching UCF transition to the Power 5, watching Cincinnati, watching these other teams transition to a Power 5 schedule, where did they come up short? And most of the time it was because they just didn't have enough dudes along the line of scrimmage. Now, it's great. They have great quarterback, Preston Tone. That was really effective last year. But will the offensive line be able to hold up? That, I think, is a question mark. They're going to have great weapons. They're going to have great running backs. They're going to have great skill. But will the offensive line be good enough to hold up throughout the course of a Power 5 schedule? 12 games now. Remember, 0-3 against Power 5 teams last year. You look at the defense. Now, they did a really good job from 22 to 23. They got much better. Allowed just 17 points a game last year. It was one of the best improvements in the country under defensive coordinator Scott Simmons. The problem is they look a little bit thin up front based on last year's roster. Well, what'd they do? They go out and they add 8 Power 5 defensive linemen to bolster their interior in the portal. I also think their schedule is pretty manageable too. Yes, they host Florida State. That'll be at the end of September. That'll be a great litmus test to see where SMU is at. They go to Louisville. So keep an eye on SMU. It's year 1, but things set up okay for them as they transition into the Power 5 for the first time in a really, really long time. Speaking of production returning, nobody has more than Virginia Tech. Now, we know what their whole MO is. They want to run the ball. They want to stop the run. They want to be aggressive on defense. And they need to improve just a little bit on offense. But they found an identity last year. I mean, 6-3 down the stretch. An incredible beatdown against Virginia there to win their 18th Commonwealth Cup in the last 19 tries. And then a really nice and impressive performance against Tulane in the Military Bowl has the Hokies feeling themselves a little bit with some momentum this offseason. Now, they bring back everybody, okay? We know since Kyron Drones took over at quarterback and how they redesigned the offense around his skill set, they should be in a really good spot. We know that he's going to be dynamic with the ball in his hands. Now, the next step for him is taking chances downfield and hitting those downfield shots. That was a huge issue last year. If they can improve in that area and create explosives with how they run the ball, they're going to be a very difficult offense to defend. They bring back all their wideouts. They got their running back production back. They got some serious star power on defense. Antoine Powell-Ryland had 13.5 tackles for loss last year and finished second in the ACC with 9.5 sacks. All right. They are entering into this upcoming year with a lot of known commodities. And if you look at the schedule, should be looking at least 8 wins. I mean, you really should. At Vandy, that should feel good about that one. Marshall, at ODU. I understand ODU's been a challenge in the past. It shouldn't be this year. Rutgers, be careful there. Well, that's one of the sneaky good non-conference games that no one's talking about, but be careful with that matchup. At Miami, at Stanford, Boston College comes to them. Georgia Tech comes to them. You're at Cuse. Clemson comes to you. At Duke, and UVA is at home this year. You look at that schedule. I think it's a challenging schedule, which is why I don't have Virginia Tech right now in tier 3, because I think that schedule is really tough. I think Rutgers 7-8 win football team, Miami 7-8 win football team, Georgia Tech has a real high ceiling, Clemson has a real high ceiling. I think this is a really, really tough schedule, but I would not be surprised at all if we fast forward to season's end and Virginia Tech is lurking in the mix for 8 or 9 wins. It would not surprise me whatsoever. Let's go next to North Carolina. Now, here's what I think is difficult to wrap your head around. This team has rinse and repeat the last couple of years. Great starts to the season before they fall off into oblivion in November. Mack Brown said after the bowl game, we'd be a 12-win team if we played better on defense. Well, that led to them making an adjustment on the defensive side of the football. In comes Jeff Collins, former head coach of Georgia Tech, former defensive coordinator of Mississippi State and Florida. You look at the offense, I think the offense is going to be just fine. Max Johnson steps in for Drake May. He's not Drake May, but I do think their weapons on the perimeter are pretty dang good. They do have to replace quite a few pieces up front, but the skill positions are stacked, and the tight end room is as deep as it's ever been. Plus, you have an elite running back in Omarion Hampton, who had 253 carries last year and averaged, like 1 million yards per carry, thereabouts. The guy gets a lot of volume, and he runs extremely hard. And they have the Darwin Barlow addition, who's also very physical, to take some of the load off him. But you have a difference-making running back in Hampton, who was in the mix for the Doak Walker Award last year. They have struggled on defense for a long time. The good news is Jeff Collins' defenses have always played with tremendous intensity. And almost to the point where it's like, this is hectic. It is havoc creating, and they're hopefully going to create a lot of mistakes by the opposing offense. They have a couple of pieces back, like Kamen Rucker and a couple others, that they can kind of build the defense around. But either way, hope the defense can take a step this year for Mack Brown. As far as the schedule, at Minnesota, they got to get that one. Got to get that one early in the season. At Duke, rivalry game on the road, but they have a lot more known commodities than Duke. Georgia Tech comes to them. That should be an exciting game. They're at Florida State. If they can get things solved defensively, that might be an interesting one as well, even though I'll give Florida State a significant leg up. And they host NC State, a team that's had their number the last few years. North Carolina, team that's kind of being slept on right now. Not saying I'm picking them to win the league, but no one's really talking about them because so much of the emphasis is put on Drake May, but they have a lot of good pieces in other places. Let's go next to tier number 5, okay? Tier 5. These are the teams that could and should make a bowl game this year. Anything less than a bowl game would be a disappointment. Let's start with the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Now, one of the strangest teams last year to evaluate. They were great when nobody was giving them any credit, and they were very average when people were touting them as the favorite, okay? They were 19-point underdogs against Miami, get a win. 12-point underdogs against North Carolina, get a win. They won 4 ACC games when they were underdogs. Yes, that is accurate. They also got blown out by a Mack team and got beat by Boston College. Tough to wrap their head around. But either way, Georgia Tech, they were great in an underdog role, and they might be in an underdog role a lot when looking at this schedule this year. Now, Haynes King did a lot of great things last year, whether it was his athleticism, his improved accuracy, all those things were great. He kept the defense honest with his ability to scramble and create big plays. Problem is, he still turned the ball over an awful lot. 16 interceptions last year. That was the worst in the Power 5. They did surround him with great weapons, though. Jamal Haynes making the switch from wide receiver to running back paid off. The guy averaged over 6 yards a carry last year. He's got lightning speed to complement Haynes King, who also has lightning speed, to complement the receivers, who all seem to have lightning speed, and 6 of their top 7 receivers return. The bad news is the defense was not good. They hired a new defensive coordinator in Tyler Santucci, who is taught by Mike Elko at Duke the last couple of years. That's Mike Elko's guy. He loves him. So he's going to implement a defense that looks a little different than what Georgia Tech has used the last couple of years. I think he's a great defensive mind and should lead to improvement on that side of the ball. Now, I think the schedule's brutal. Okay? You have 6 of the top teams in the ACC. You also pick up Georgia and you have Notre Dame. So the schedule is brutal. On paper, from a personnel standpoint, Georgia Tech should be very, very dangerous. And we already said that when they're an underdog, they are extremely dangerous. Problem is, they're going to be an underdog a lot. At Syracuse, at Louisville, at North Carolina. Notre Dame comes to them. Be careful, Irish. That would be a spot where you need to be very careful. At Virginia Tech, Miami comes to them. Be careful, Canes, even though I think Miami will have that one circled given the way things went last year. NC State comes to them, and then they're on the road at Georgia in the final game of the regular season. Tough spot for them. That's why they're in Tier 5, even though their roster would have them more towards Tier 4 and some of the returnees that they have and the improvements I expect defensively. Let's also go with the Pitt Panthers. Coming off the worst season for Pat Narduzzi in a long time. Terrible year. They've missed on a couple quarterback transfers. It just didn't really materialize, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Now, he kind of went against the grain here. He decided to fire Frank Cignetti as his offensive coordinator, and he went and gets Cade Bell from the FCS, which is a guy that you're probably not super familiar with. But I can just tell you this, the offense is going to be very exciting. It's an offensive style that is very different from what we've seen from Pitt the last few years. They're up-tempo. They want to be attacking. They want to ramp it up, play a lot of plays, and it should lead to great offensive production. After all, Bell's offense at Valdosta State was pretty dang impressive. Back in 2018, they set the Division II scoring record. Then he turns to Western Carolina, turns them into an offensive juggernaut. Their offense led the FCS in total offense at 504 yards a game and was 3rd in passing and 4th in scoring. So I look at their offensive hire and I'm really optimistic. And I think that group hopefully will get things going because their weapons aren't bad. They just got to get things going because the offensive line has not been as good the last couple of years. They did lose Charlie Partridge defensively, which will be a huge piece that is missed. Defensive line coach wasn't a coordinator or anything, but they will miss his presence. And it's already evident by some of the guys that have left and the drop-off that maybe you've seen in recruiting in the front seven defensively. Look at the schedule. West Virginia is on the schedule. At North Carolina, at SMU, Clemson is at home before they go to Louisville. So there's some wins in there, and I would expect Pitt to bounce back in a big way. I think they'll get to bowl eligibility, but anything beyond that is difficult for me to predict at this point. Syracuse, I also expect to see back in the postseason. Extremely favorable schedule at times, and the talent additions that we've seen. Top 40 high school class, top 25 transfer portal class. We're not used to seeing that from Syracuse these last few years. You bring in Kyle McCord, who was at one point a 5-star prospect, sat there, waited for his opportunity in Columbus, goes 11-1, and says, yep, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Completed 66% of his passes, though, for over 3,100 yards and 24 touchdowns. He also made good decisions. Didn't throw a lot of picks either. He has a great weapon in Rondé Gadsden, who was poised in the preseason last year to be considered for an All-American candidacy, but got banged up early, decided to return, and now should be the go-to guy as kind of the hybrid, oversized wide receiver that they move around in the offense. And the schedule has me feeling pretty good about Syracuse this year. You got Georgia Tech at your place. You're at NC State. Virginia Tech, it comes to you. You're at BC, and then you got Miami at home as well. Be careful, Miami. We know that Syracuse has been a house of horrors for many teams over the years. You would not want your playoff dreams dashed in an upset on the road against the Orange. So I think Syracuse could be a team that certainly is playing in the postseason again this year with what they've improved roster-wise and the way the schedule sets up. Let's go next to Cal. Now, Cal, I thought, did a pretty good job of adding players to the portal. They've already improved positions of need, like wide receiver in the secondary. They also were able to hold on to Jaden Knott. Now, Jaden Knott was an all Pac-12 running back last year. A lot of people aren't familiar with his game, but he led the Pac-12 with 1,300 yards. The guy is the real deal. So I'm really, really encouraged that he was able to come back. They also returned 3 of their top 4 wide receivers and supplemented the roster with a bunch of significant additions. The schedule, tricky for sure. At Auburn, at Florida State, Miami is at home, NC State is at home. So a couple big opportunities there in Berkeley to knock off teams that I think have a real chance to be in the top 25 by the time they play the Bears. Then they go to SMU. So Cal, bunch of losables on there, bunch of losable games, but not enough to make me think they won't be playing in the postseason again this season. Let's go next to Boston College. Now, crazy what's going on with Boston College this offseason. Jeff Hafley leaves to become a position coach for Green Bay Packers. Well, in comes Bill O'Brien. I didn't think that you could upgrade at the head coaching spot, but they did. I like Jeff Hafley a lot. Bill O'Brien's a massive upgrade. Extremely well-respected offensive mind. Worked with Tom Brady, was the OC for both Bill Belichick and Nick Saban. Took over at Penn State under impossible circumstances and did a pretty good job under those circumstances. Was the head coach for the Houston Texans for 7 years. And the guy has been an offensive mastermind for a really long time. And now he gets the keys to the car that is Thomas Castellanos, who is a great athlete. I mean, incredible athlete. First Boston College quarterback ever to throw for 2,000 plus yards and rush for another 1,000 yards, okay? The best running quarterback there in a decade. He also added 28 total touchdowns. Problem is, there needs to be some decision-making improvements. Too many turnovers, too many poor decisions, and if they can make sure that those are coached out of him, they'll be in a really great spot. And given the late change that they had with the coaching staff, they went to the portal, added a bunch of skill positions, added a bunch of wide receivers, added a couple tight ends. I think Boston College is well positioned to improve pretty significantly this year. Plus, you look at what they have. Middle tier, the kind of bottom tier of the ACC, they got some opportunities to make a little noise and to pull some upsets. And we know the Boston College has done that time and time again in the last decade and change. At Florida State, that'll be a tough one. We know that. Missouri is you're on the road at Missouri, 2 teams that are probably going to be ranked in the top 10 to 12 in the preseason. Michigan State comes to you. That's a game you absolutely have to win. Jonathan Smith is reloading. What they're doing at Sparty you're reloading with what you're doing there at Boston College. Maybe you can get one done there at home. At Virginia Tech, Louisville comes to you, Syracuse comes to you, at SMU, and then North Carolina comes to you as well. I think Boston College can get to the postseason. They have to pull an upset or two, but I think they will with what they returned from last year. And then finally, this is tier 6. I think the likelihood of a bowl game is really slim for these next few teams. Now, I would love it if they got there, but it's hard for me to envision improvement that significantly to get you over the hump. Let's start with Virginia. This is the toughest one for me because they had 5 one-score losses in 2023. They also have a ton of returning production. So you would think there'd be drastic improvement from where they were last year to where they are this year. The problem is they got to replace their best playmaker in Malik Washington. And I think there are some things about their quarterback situation that are somewhat unsettled. Tony Muskett got a little banged up. In came Anthony Calandria, did a lot of good things. Also did a lot of really forgettable things, really up and down, which most freshmen are. So they still got to iron out that quarterback spot. So you look at that spot. If they can get those things figured out, they might be well positioned to make a leap. But I don't know. I don't know just yet. I think the ACC's gotten better. I think Virginia has stayed the same in many ways. So I'm not as optimistic about them. I also think that this schedule, a lot of people saying it's a pretty easy start to the season. I disagree. I think there's a lot of real significant potholes. At Wake, that's a pothole. They're better than Wake, but that's a pothole. Maryland. I think Maryland's a team that's a 7-8 win football team in the Big Ten. At Coastal Carolina, got to be careful there. We know Coastal has been a spoiler in the past. Boston College at home. I already told you I think Boston College is the team that's going to the bowl game this year. Louisville's at home. At Clemson, North Carolina, at Pitt, at Notre Dame. SMU comes to you, then you're at Virginia Tech. I just have a hard time finding 6 wins there for Tony Elliott and the Virginia Cavaliers. Let's go next to Duke. Now, Manny Diaz takes over a situation and is going to try to recreate what worked in his last tenure as a head coach. He found lightning in a bottle when he hired Rhett Lashley to be the offensive coordinator. So what does he do when he gets a head job yet again? He goes to Rhett Lashley's tree and gets Jonathan Brewer. Brewer was with Lashley at SMU the last couple years, but was on staff at Miami with Diaz when Lashley was calling the plays. Quarterback competition has got to be ironed out, whether it's Grayson Loftus or Texas transfer Malik Murphy. Either way, they got to get that ironed out, and we'll see how things work. But all 9 defensive and offensive linemen are gone. All right, that is a problem. Look at the inside out. Roster's built from the inside out. Not a lot to feel great about with what Duke returns. They also have a brutal schedule. North Carolina's at home, at Georgia Tech, Florida State, SMU, at Miami, at NC State, and Virginia Tech is at home. So really tough schedule. If they can get to the postseason, that would be an impressive achievement. Let's go next to Stanford. Look, getting back to bowl games, still a lot of things to do. Total rebuild of what they're trying to be. They need the offensive line to improve drastically. The defense needs to be better in the front 7. What we saw last year, they went young. They went really, really young. They had the 5th most snaps by freshmen. And hopefully that will pay dividends down the road. I just don't know if it's going to be this year. So I think you got another year of rebuilding for Stanford before things can maybe become more competitive in 2025. And then finally, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Now, Warren Ruggiero, their offensive coordinator, said that there was an issue trying to find distribution to their playmaking wide receivers. The unit last year was kind of up and down. They also got to figure out the quarterback spot, and they got torched over and over and over again on deep balls last year defensively. So a lot to iron out for Wake Forest. Have a difficult time seeing them get the bowl eligibility, especially considered the schedule. Ole Miss, difficult game at home, at NC State, Clemson, at North Carolina, at Miami. I look at what Dave Clawson did for a long time. They did a lot of great things, but right now the talent is not what it was. They retained it better than they did in years past, but do they have enough to be competitive and improved ACC? That's a question I'm not quite ready to answer. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever it is you get the show. We appreciate you guys. Thanks so much to all of you that have tweeted into the show at AlwaysCFB. And thanks so much for those of you that have told your friends about what we're doing here at ACF. It does not go unnoticed. The numbers are going up. We don't have some crazy marketing budget, so the numbers going up like crazy. Y'all must be the ones that are doing the hard work for us and spreading the word about what we're doing here at ACF. So for all of us here at Always College Football, we wish you the very best, and we'll see you next time. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.